Today on Between the Lines, turning mayhem into miracles with one of the most iconic songwriters and record producers of our time, the legendary Bobby Hart. Welcome, I'm Barry Kibrick. Bobby, along with his partner Tommy Boyce, has sold over 40 million records. Best known for writing and producing the many #1 hits of the legendary Monkees, with his book, Psychedelic Bubblegum, Bobby gives us more to chew on than you could ever have imagined.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of
I
corruption.
don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the first thing to do.
Bobby, it is such a thrill having you. As I told you on the phone, people used to ask, are you a Stones or a Beatles fan? And I would go, hell no, I'm a Monkees fan. Welcome to the show, Bobby.
Barry, it's a real honor to be with you. Big fans, my wife and I both.
Well, it's my pleasure. I want to say, you know, there's almost a deception in the title of the book. It's Psychedelic Bubblegum because we know that the category of music was known as bubblegum, but you always, even at the very beginning, put depth. No matter how bubblegummy it was supposed to be, you put depth in the lyrics of all your songs.
Thank you. Well, you know, the title, it's not a book about drugs, obviously. It's a book about music, primarily, but it's also my life journey, my spiritual journey, my story. But they lumped us into that genre they called bubblegum music, Tommy Boyce and myself, because we were writing for some young kids, basically, who were our biggest audience. So they called it bubblegum, but when Tommy and I came back to California to sign with Screen Gems Music, we immediately were writing that stuff, and we were getting records by Herman's Hermits and Gary Lewis and the Playboys and Dino, Desi, and Billy. The lighter, like first half of the 60s kind of groups, you know. But when we got out here, we saw there was something else going on, and we were on the Sunset Strip whenever we weren't in the studio or on tour. We were down there at a regular table at the Whiskey watching The Doors, and down the street watching Arthur Lee and Love, and we were being introduced to all this. This was something new, and they were calling it psychedelic music. And so we started introducing some of those elements to our productions, East Indian instruments and feedback guitars, and so I said it would be better to call it psychedelic bubblegum, what we were doing at that time.
But you know, even at an early age, you knew you wanted to get out of your small town. You knew you wanted to be somebody. But a lot of kids want that. But the reason you gave, and I'm going to read this, and it was because you were admiring the DJs at the time and the people that were coming into those radio studios. It was graciousness, class, confidence, and control. And those are very different young men's reasons for wanting to be something.
It's true. It's what I was drawn to, and these country artists I watched and these DJs I listened to. And I did want to distinguish myself in some way, but I wanted to, I was painfully shy, basically, as a young kid. And so my dream was I'd be a radio disc jockey, and I'd be in a dark room somewhere, and I could be a star, but nobody would have to see me in person.
Well, you know, the line you use, I think, is so important. You say, reconciling handicaps with ambition.
That's what happened.
That's a lesson for all of us in life.
That's what I had to do. I didn't see any other way around it. And so I did my 6 months in active duty in the Army, and I came at 18 years old to Hollywood to go to disc jockey school, Don Martin School of Radio on Hollywood Boulevard.
Oh gosh.
And I wasn't going to that school for more than 2 or 3 months before I got waylaid, sidetracked into a whole different profession. I saw a little sign on my way to work. I got a job printing record labels, and on my way to work I passed this sign over a recording studio that said, "Come in and see what your voice sounds like, $10. Well, that one Saturday I got my nerve up, and from then on I was hooked, and I wasn't going to be a disc jockey after that. I wanted to be a rock and roll star.
You know something, you talked about signs. There's a favorite story I tell everyone. There's a famous record shop, I know you know of it, Amoeba Records, here in Hollywood. And every time I walk in, on the walls they have old rock and roll replicas of posters. Okay. And there's a classic one of Jimi Hendrix opening for the Monkees. And I want to bring this in because there's a, we'll fill it in and I'll tell that story, or you can, about what you told Jimi Hendrix when he stopped. But then the funny part is, because I always was thinking about that when I was reading the book, then I realized when you wrote it, your opening act was Roy Orbison for Bobby Hart. I mean, Roy Orbison, that even made you, you're laughing now, but that's as funny to me as Jimi Hendrix opening up for the Monkees.
I never made that comparison. That's very good. It's true, Roy actually opened a show that I was on when I was 18, 19 years old. My record producer said, I booked you on a show, booked three shows, a weekend tour of Texas. And so we did El Paso and another city. But the third show was in Midland, Odessa, and the opening act was a local kid named Roy Orbison. And he was just singing covers of Jerry Lee Lewis songs, but I recognized the talent in his voice. I mean, what pipes he had. But the funny thing was, I talk about it in the book, I had been assigned a driver for that day that would take me around and get me where I needed to be. And the guy was hearing my record on the radio as we were driving, and he just thought that was a big smash and I was a big star, which I was not, of course. It was just they were promoting the record in Midland. But years later, the guy's name was Joe Melson, who was driving me. And years later, I was looking at a Roy Orbison Greatest Hits album, and there I noticed that Roy Orbison had a co-writer on almost all of his biggest hits, and the guy's name was Joe Melson. So either they hooked up right after that night or soon after, because they were on the charts within a couple of months after that.
Well, you say hooked up with a partner. Obviously, you're known for the work you did with Tommy Boyce and Boyce and Hart. People don't realize, there's a documentary, the guys behind the music, but the truth is you guys were also in front of the music. You, as you just said, you performed, you played, you did different things. But when you met Tommy, there was a click. And that click seems to have come from the fact that you loved his ability to laugh at himself. Isn't that a great quality in general?
It was one of his most endearing qualities. He was bigger than life. And as most people know, he passed a number of years ago. But he was the consummate salesman and just totally energized all the time. I was more laid back, and so I needed a partner like that who could knock doors down and get our feet in where they needed to be and so on. That quality always struck me about Tommy, because he would be blustery and he would be sometimes embarrassing himself and others around him. But when you pointed it out, he would break up and be the biggest, get the biggest laugh out of the incident.
There's a part here that when I read, I think every single one of us, myself, the viewers, are going to relate to. And this is a line you say, the constant wondering if you got what it takes. And we all almost sinfully go through life with that constant wondering. And we know it's not good for us, but yet it's part of human nature.
It's true, and I think it's really prevalent in the entertainment industry because you have that constant feedback. I had probably a dozen singles out before I had any success, and over those 6-7 years of trying and doing and trying to get better at my craft, there were times when I thought, well, how long am I going to keep doing this? And maybe I'm going to be working at this print shop for the rest of my life. It's not something I wanted. And I didn't give up, and I kept going. But those questioning moments always appear probably in everyone's life.
Well, what's also something you did in this book? There's very little of this, but you do dedicate, I think, 4, maybe 5 at the most pages to what I will call, in the book world, self-help little tips. And you call them stepping through the potholes of life. And I want to share them because those are the things that really matter more than anything. We'll get to the monkeys, we'll get to all of that. But stepping through the potholes of life, here's one of them. And the first one you talk about is especially for creativity, as you said. You've got to get some oil on the canvas, find your tools, and persevere, calm yourself, and be grateful.
There are little snippets, you know. It's not a self-help book, but as I started, it's not a self-help book, but it's there for anyone to help themselves to anything that resonates with them. As I was writing, I began to notice patterns in my life that you don't notice when you're just living it day by day. But I could see when I was making the mistakes in the past and what result that brought, and I could see the times when I made the right decisions and choices. And I began to have a desire, really start to see it as an obligation to share some of the things I had learned that seemed to directly relate to the successes that I was able to get to.
One of them I want to bring out here is doing what our egos want and our conscience allowed. And that's even the title of a chapter, but that's an interesting, because the ego and the consciousness of our minds, they are sometimes in conflict. Sometimes they're not, but sometimes they are.
Sometimes you shout it down, that conscience, because the other side of you just wants that thing, whatever it is, so badly. And so you say, well, I know this I really shouldn't be doing this, whatever. As I looked back, I found that there were many more times when I was going toward the light than toward the darkness, and that's what drove me toward reaching where I reached. And yet, when I got there, it wasn't as all fulfilling as I thought it was going to be. So I talk about some of the tricks that worked for me, some of the tools that I found along the way. I talk about affirming and visualizing what you really want, making a discipline out of it, and using your willpower every day. And what this does, it kind of programs this greatest computer of all that we all have. Maybe you've never actually formulated what your goal is. And so to do that, to do a visualizing technique, that was very powerful. And the other thing that it does is it starts to melt away all of the barriers that we have built up over the years. Barriers like, I'm not worthy to have this thing that I want, or I'm not good enough, or I don't have the background. Whatever, all the no's, those start to melt away because you're just seeing in your mind what you really want, something that's going to be good for you.
Well, you use these exact words. You say this disconnection from the soul. That's really what it is. An empty space deep in your heart. You're always searching for clues and roads into yourself.
That's what the spiritual journey is, isn't it? And we all do that to a degree. But like I said, there are certain ones that worked for me, and so I'm just sharing them.